On last week's episode of Ears to Hear, we talked about the Christian and the environment. This week we are going to think about another topic that is related. To introduce it, consider these statistics. According to the New York Times, the fastest growing segment of commercial real estate over the past 4 decades has been storage rentals. 1 out of every 10 Americans has a You Rent It storage bay, someplace to keep all of their extra stuff. The second statistic that I wanted to share is, according to NPR, the size of the American home has nearly tripled in size over the last 50 to 75 years, from less than 1,000 square feet to over 2,500 square feet. Now it's approaching 3,000. Even as in the same time, the average American family size has actually shrunk by 33%. So the family has actually gotten smaller, while the houses have actually gotten bigger. The third statistic I want to share is, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, 25% of people with 2-car garages do not have room to park their cars inside their garages because their garages are full of stuff. So what do we see? We see bigger houses and we see more material goods than, frankly, we know what to do with. Last week, it was the environment. This week, we're going to talk about the Christian and consumerism. So we're going to be looking in Scripture and we're going to see what the Bible says about this topic, and we'll see whether or not we have ears to hear. We appreciate you joining us for this week's episode. We appreciate you joining us for this week's podcast. As usual, I'm John, and with me,
Andrew Walker.
Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
How are you, John?
Oh, I'm doing all right. So, consumerism. Last week it was the environment. We're getting on all the hot button topics.
Yeah. Well, they kind of go hand in hand a bit because, excess and waste, those affect the environment, and they also affect our relationship with stuff.
This past Sunday, did any of our brethren throw tomatoes at you after hearing the podcast or anything?
No, I don't think I got too many harsh looks or no negative reactions so far.
Does that mean they're not listening? Those dogs, why don't they listen to the podcast?
Maybe people are just polite, John. There's always that possibility.
Maybe so. I suppose it's a good theory.
I'll try not to assume the worst.
All right, so this week we're going to be talking about and thinking about consumerism and what the Bible, says about it, basically. And I thought we might just start by defining it. What is consumerism?
Yeah, so I looked at a couple definitions, and one was a preoccupation with the acquiring of consumer goods. It's kind of on a personal level, just a person's infatuation or focus on getting stuff. Another definition I found kind of spoke more about how it's the assumption that constantly acquiring and purchasing consumer goods in a free market is always a good thing and should be encouraged and should be the focus of a society, really.
Yeah, it's just about produce more stuff, buy more stuff. The economy, you hope it keeps growing, but you have to keep buying stuff in order for it to grow. Mm-hmm. And
it's sort of like investing in the stock market. The stock market keeps growing as long as we keep making more.
Right.
And
as long as you have more buyers than sellers, it keeps going up. The problem is what happens when people don't have the money anymore, and then bad things happen. But anyway, so that's basically what it is, just as a general definition. And I was just looking at some statistics, and I mentioned a few in the intro. But I was looking at, how many packages Amazon delivers on a daily basis. And it's just an astronomical number. And we just live in a society now where from the moment I point and click, I expect it on my doorstep within a day. And if it's not there, then obviously something's wrong. And we just live in a society that demands that. It's instant gratification. And it's just amazing to look at some of the statistics describing the consumer society that we live in. But the question is, one of the questions I had is, okay, what sort of things are associated with consumerism? You know, in the things we're talking about, and this somewhat harkens back to what we talked about last week, what sort of things would you say, Andrew, are a part, almost an inherent part of consumerism?
Well, as it's based upon continuous growth, and it's based upon continuous acquisition of more. So one of the things that you find inherently in a consumerist society is waste and excess. You find owning more than what a person needs to survive. We have so much more than we need to survive, evidenced by the lack of storage space in the ever-growing American home. Is
right.
we fill up our living places with things that we don't need.
There was a study in preparing for this episode. There was a study, I think it was in England, that looked at children, and the average child had 300 toys, and they played with 7 of them. And I would say that probably goes the same for adults. Just, you know, that mindset of excess, and it's just overconsumption. And it's like that is consumerism. That is buy more stuff, and so that's excess. That's when the Bible talks about it, it's gluttony.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about you don't need this.
Yeah.
We don't need this. We think we need it, but the fact that we only utilize, you know, the stat that we had last week was the average American throws away between 30 and 40% of their food. 30 and 40% goes to waste. So we think we need it. The actuality is, no, we don't. The reality is, no, we don't. So that's excess. The other thing you mentioned was waste, like we just mentioned, and they go hand in hand. Debt, I think, is another. Would you say it's an inherent part?
I mean, certainly there's those who spending becomes a real problem, and shopping and buying things can become really akin to an addiction, like a substance addiction, where it's almost an uncontrolled behavior at that point, where the person just gets out of control, and they spend more than they could ever afford to, because they constantly are pursuing the enjoyment and the pleasure of acquiring something new.
I know you mentioned the stock market a little bit ago, and in the past, I want to say couple years, there's been some reshuffling on the big board of the top 10 to 20 companies, if I remember correctly. And some of the old companies like General Electric have kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit. But the one that shot to the top is Visa. And these are companies that are running on, I understand, you have the individual transactions with a credit card, but they are debt-driven businesses. And it's we can talk about student debt and we can talk about other stuff, but just the idea of debt, I think, is inherent in a consumer society.
And maybe to that we should say, not all debt is, debt with a plan, debt with the purpose of achieving something or trying to build something, right, is one thing. But this is debt for which you're not really getting anything that adds value to your life in return. Right. It's debt for the sake of something that's temporary and fleeting, and you'll soon either outgrow, or it becomes obsolete, or you're off looking for the next thing.
Right.
And that kind of debt is for one, it's pointless, but two, it never stops. If you aren't satisfied, then you're constantly going to keep digging a deeper hole.
Right. Okay, so those are some of the things inherent with consumerism. Now, believe it or not, this is not a financial podcast. So, okay, so what does the Bible say about this? Because you look up in a concordance, you look up the word consumerism, and guess what? You're not going to find it.
No.
So people automatically, what are they doing talking about consumerism then? This isn't something that Christians ought to think about. And it's like, that's funny. The Lord had a good bit to say about money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about money. The Lord had a good bit to say about stuff. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about stuff. So I thought, one of the passages that came to my mind, this is Ecclesiastes chapter 2. And this is, of course, talking about Solomon. And this is verse 9. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. And this was my reward from all my labor. That idea, if that doesn't sound like a consumer-driven society, I don't know what does. When he says, whatever my eyes desired, I went after it. Whatever it was. Right. Whether it was stuff, whether it was people, whether it was servants, whether it was houses. But then he goes on and he says, then I looked at all the works that my hands had done and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. And it's like whatever he wanted, he went after, and he realized, guess what? It's not going to make you happy. It's not going to make you more spiritually minded. It's just stuff. And he talks about it later on, and he's like, he says, and this is to paraphrase it, who's going to get all this stuff when I'm dead and gone?
Right.
And who knows if it's even going to be there, and, there's other issues as well. But he says it's just vanity. Go ahead.
I was just thinking how, we would say that we live in a society that's consumerist. Solomon was an example of one who had really a very unique position in his society that he lived in. He was the king, and he was the wealthiest person by far in all of Israel. So he could even be far more consumerist than probably most of all of Israel could possibly have imagined being. And yet even an average person in America probably has capabilities of acquiring things that maybe even Solomon couldn't have dreamt of, just the ability to have things at a moment's notice. But
that idea, because it talks about some of the foreign kings who would send him goods, whether it was lumber or whether it was gold or whatever it may be. And I just mentioned Amazon, and it's like all we have to do is point and click.
Sure. And
we're living in a time that we're living like royalty.
The ease with which we can live is no one's ever lived like we have. No time in history has it been like this.
At least as far as convenience goes.
Yeah, but all this to say, Solomon was incredibly unique in his time, and even when he was on the pinnacle, we think, oh, we're average, we're getting by. We're not the super rich. We're not like Bezos or these super rich who can have these $1 billion homes. We think that's rich now, but even Solomon, who was the pinnacle of wealth at his time, learned the lessons from it and wrote them down in Ecclesiastes, which is it wasn't a lasting enjoyment. He did it for pleasure. There is pleasure in acquiring things. He acknowledges that, but it's all going to go away.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that towards the end of the podcast. Another passage in Ecclesiastes is Ecclesiastes 5, where it says, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. So now we're getting into ideas of contentment. And I personally think a consumer society, if it's not the exact opposite of contentment, I'm not sure what else would be.
Well, yeah, because like we talked about, it's predicated on growth.
Right.
As soon as you are content, a content person says, no more. I don't need more. I have enough. Well, the stock market doesn't like it if everybody at once says, oh, I have enough, because then growth just halts. So, the economy that we live in is one where you need growth. You assume that growth is going to be the norm. So, it's definitely inherent to consumerism is dissatisfaction.
And it just starts getting into, for people to think, well, Christians really don't need to be concerned with this. I think they're blind, frankly, to the real dangers of what we're talking about. When Jesus is talking, and this is Luke 12. This is another passage I had where someone comes to Jesus and they say, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus says, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" But then he goes on and he says, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." And that's what we're talking about.
Right. people aren't different from the way they were back then versus the way they are now. Maybe the tools we have around us and the amount of production we have around us is different, but people wanted just as much in Jesus's day to acquire possessions and grow in their number of possessions. So it really is a call for Christians. We really have to be different than what the natural inclination of society is going to be. There has to be some kind of living differently than everyone else around us.
And I think that's the dangerous part right there, because I'm afraid if we brought this up in an environment like a Bible class, I'm afraid people might say, well, this is the society that we live in and there's just nothing we can do about it. It's like, yeah, we may live in the world, but that doesn't mean we have to be worldly. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be different. And to just justify covetousness because we live in a covetous society is missing the point and ignoring what the Lord has taught and what Scripture teaches on this subject, that we have to learn contentment, and we have to learn that man's life is not about the abundance of the things he possesses. Within that account in Luke, he goes on, and it's the parable of the foolish farmer who says, I'm going to tear down my barns and I'm going to build bigger because of all his stuff, because of all the grain he has, right? He had been blessed abundantly, so I'm going to tear him down, I'm going to build bigger. And the Lord says, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. And to just look at just what people think about, at what people pursue, because that's the consumerism.
Yeah.
What are people pursuing? What are we pursuing? And it goes down, it just amounts to worldliness, frankly. What other passages did you have in hand, Andrew?
Well, you talked about the idea of pursuing, because being of this mindset, it takes a lot of energy. The more that we're not satisfied with the worldly goods that we have, if we constantly keep wanting more, well, we're going to need to make more money so that we can afford to buy more stuff. We're going to have to work more so that we can make more money. It takes more of our time. It takes more of our focus. And I was thinking about in Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus is talking about where we lay up our treasures, and it's a reflection of where our focus is and what we're willing to devote our time to. Matthew 6:19, he says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And he says in verse 24, how no man can serve two masters, for he will either hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And that word money is the word mammon, which can be money or possessions or just worldly wealth. So, it's about divided attention. You have a finite amount of energy in your life, in what you can do. You only have so much room in the flask of how you can divvy up your time. And the more that we devote ourselves to things that are of a worldly interest, things that are about worldly pleasure, it still eats up our time, but what are we gaining for it? It's a focus, it's a preoccupation, but we're not getting a return out of it.
And to think about that idea, not getting a return. A lot of times people want to talk about some of the, we already read the passage, those who love silver will not be satisfied with silver. It does not satisfy. It does not, people will talk about retail therapy as though buying new shoes or a new outfit, as though that's the answer. Well, I'm feeling depressed, so I go out and I spend money. And, you made the point a little bit ago, you may be happy short term. The new shoes look good, the new outfit looks good, but does it last? And it doesn't last. And this goes to the idea of what's your return? Mm-hmm. And we can talk about things like depression. We can talk about, those ideas where people are trying to make themselves happy through worldliness.
Yeah, we've talked about,
and it doesn't work.
Trying to medicate yourself
Right.
on this podcast before, and we've talked about it in the context of addictions or other behaviors, but consumerism fits right up on that list.
Right.
And I think so many people living today don't know what else to do with themselves other than, well, I need to try to make it in the world. I need to try to, get my name on the map or one up my neighbors in how
Right.
nice my grill is or how nice my car is, and that's what people see. So if they don't have focus, then, well, might as well try devoting myself to that.
And it's not satisfying.
No.
It just isn't. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is another passage that it just came to my mind, where as Paul is talking to the Corinthians, and he just makes this point: you were bought at a price, do not become slaves of men. And I understand there's a greater context to this passage, but the idea of, and he says, if you were a slave when you became a Christian, do not be concerned about it. But then he goes on, he says, don't become slaves of men, though. And to think about indebtedness, because that was how slavery happened back then in the Old Testament, where if you could not pay your debts, then you would become a person's slave. And to think about what we're talking about, and indebtedness, and it's like people are having to work more and more. I know when I moved to Columbus, and it's just amazing to get a house, to find some place to live, whether it's renting or buying or whatever the case is, and it's just amazing. People are having to work more and more and more. Yep. And this goes to the discussion where you have people who are working lower paying jobs, and they're saying we need to be paid more because we can in no way get by on this, because everything is costing more and more. The root of all that is consumerism. We're talking about we need more and more people to buy stuff, and it all becomes a vicious cycle, and who gets left behind are the lower earners. And they're sitting here now and they're like, what are we supposed to do? Yep. And it's just a part of an overall discussion. But within that discussion is a conversation about indebtedness and basically becoming slaves of men, where you have people thinking they have to work 2-3 jobs just to get by. And they think that's what life is about. And it's like, that's not what life is about.
Right.
And we're not talking about if we will learn contentment, if we will learn that it's not about keeping up with the Joneses, and to live in such a way that we do not become slaves of men. And all of a sudden we're able to focus on better things, frankly.
Yeah. Just as you were talking about that, it's just such a compassionless existence. That constant need to keep up, and that constant need to get more. And like you said, those who have less, and those who start from a lower rung on the ladder in a consumerist society quickly get left behind. And when it's all about how do I make more money for me, spend that money on me, and keep myself happy, then it's a very compassionless system. It's all about take care of yourself, make yourself happy.
It's selfish. It's selfishness.
It's completely self-focused, and when it's all self-focused, it blots out whatever efforts people could have for compassion, for charity, for mercy on their fellow brethren and their fellow men. It just it's a hard life. It's a hard existence to constantly what do they call it? The rat race, or running in the hamster wheel. It is that. It burns people out.
Yeah. And what we're talking about, when we follow the Lord, we realize how much better of a system it is. The rat race of the world, you end up not really getting anywhere. It is the rat race. It is the wheel. And it's like, you're not going anywhere. You're making more money, but you're you have more bills and you have more problems. And Solomon talks about that when he says, as riches increase, it also increases those who, try to hang on. I can't remember the exact phrase he uses, but those who come to you looking for handouts is basically what he's talking about.
Isn't there also reference to how well they sleep at night?
Yeah. The sleep of the laboring man is sweet, and such things as that. I think a passage, as you were talking a minute ago, I was thinking about, the consumer society, and it's more and more and more. Now, just that idea of more, that is liberality. It's liberal, right? That's literally what liberalism means. More. Now, liberalism to I think most folks is going to be, oh no, they've gone liberal now. Time to turn the podcast off and stop listening. But it's, what are we liberal with? And what do we want more and more of? The consumer society just wants more and more stuff. But, so in that sense, it's not right. But in following the Lord, he does want more and more and more. The question is, of what? And that's 1 Timothy 6, verse 18. Verse 17, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. We should enjoy life. We should enjoy our blessings. The verse goes on, let them do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. That's what we need to do. We need to be rich in good works. And that's what, if we're content with a little, then now all of a sudden, what can we do? What can we do with the excess? And that's the problem. To go back to last week's, okay, what usually happens with the excess?
Buried in the ground somewhere, it gets thrown out.
Right? And it's just the mindset of excess is waste. And the Lord says, no. Anything excess, what should you do with it? It's like, share. Think about someone else other than yourself. And the consumer society, all people think about are themselves. And the Lord says, I have a better way. Stop just thinking about yourself. Provide for you, your family, and then be thinking about others. And be rich in good works. What other ideas or verses or anything should we think about, Andrew? Do you have anything on your list?
Well, while we were talking about, the ability to share, how that's, when you break the cycle of constantly serving a consumerist mindset, you find that you have the ability to share, and you have so much more freedom in how you use your goods when you're not constantly focused on pleasing yourself with them. In 2 Corinthians 8, Paul writes to the church in Corinth, and he says how, he says, talking about the church in Macedonia as an example, he says in verse 2, for in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity. He says that they were poor. He says that they had extreme poverty, and yet they gave generously. And we often would think that, well, if you're extremely impoverished, that's a pass. You don't need to you're
give.
Excused
from good works.
Yeah, you're excused from giving of your excess if you're impoverished. But Paul was commending them for not having the mindset of, oh, we don't have enough we barely have enough to get by. We can't help other people. Their mindset was, yeah, we'll help other people. We'll give whatever we can. Sure, maybe it's not as much as some of the richer people in Corinth would have been able to give, but Paul was pointing to them, saying, if they can do this out of their poverty, what can you do when you're not in that scenario? And, how many people in the church in America today are in a truly impoverished situation? I mean, yes, we have even measures of what we consider the poverty line and what's a metric that defines poverty in this country. But barely surviving is even below typically what we would consider poverty in this country.
And I will say, I know I don't consider myself an old man, but from what I've seen, it's usually the poorer people who are more generous. The rich people usually not so much. And I think that's just usually how it is. It's not how it should be, but that's the reality, sadly enough. But even there, in that passage, and where was that passage, Andrew? That was
2 Corinthians 8.
2 Corinthians 8, as he was talking about the gift that was going to be sent to, and even though they were not rich monetarily, those who he was talking about, even they were very wealthy. This is godliness with contentment is great gain. They had gained quite a bit.
We talked about the idea of a return earlier,
Right.
And to someone who's thinking like a consumerist, a return is well, if I buy this thing, this is an investment. This will make me more money later. And we talk about a return, and we immediately jump to a monetary return.
Right.
They're getting a better return on their
Right.
investment, but they're getting nothing back. In fact, it's a complete loss on their part.
Right.
They give with no pretense of receiving anything in return.
Right. They are laying up for treasure in heaven.
Right.
That's what they're doing. They're keeping their eyes where they should be. So I was just thinking, okay, so what's the answer to the society we live in? I think one thing, okay, we've been talking about consuming. So I think we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and ask that question. What are we truly consuming?
Mm-hmm.
Because what goes in usually comes back out. So are we consuming God's word? Or are we actually consuming worldliness? And whatever a person eats, that's usually what they are. So, and I understand we do live in this world, but what are we truly consuming? I think another test, a good litmus test, is to follow the money. When Jesus talks about it, and he says, wherever a man's treasure is, that's where his heart will be also. So I think a lot of times all you have to do is follow the money. And if I'm spending more money on frivolous things than I am laying up treasure in heaven, in good works, then something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I need to, I should shy away from vanity.
Right.
Is what I should do. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this because when we talk about subjects like this, the phrases that often come up are, well, we still live in the society.
Right.
We talked about that. So I was thinking about, okay, what does it really look like? What would really look different if someone was truly practicing these kind of things and not falling into that mentality of trying to always acquire more? And I think, some maybe more practical or maybe some more application kind of ideas. Are you replacing something that are you replacing something just because you're tired of it?
Right.
Or are you acquiring something because it is truly a need to function?
Right.
Trying to better define what it is that we need versus what it is that we can be content with. Maybe your sound system doesn't sound as good as this year's model, but can you sit back and be happy with it?
Yeah. Do you have to have the newest thing every 6 months?
Right. And I think another one that you pointed to a little bit was, are you thinking about appearances, or are you thinking about how is it going to look once I have the new thing?
Right.
Before you get something, is your mind going to what are other people going to think when they see me with whatever this new thing is, the newest phone, newest car, is that part of what goes into the purchasing process for you? Is I want people to think better of me or think
Right.
more highly of me, because in a consumer society, that's one of the ways that we try to.
This is how we define success.
That's how you compare person
Right.
to person. Is you look at, okay, what do they got, and when that goes into our thought process, maybe it's time to think twice about, why do I want people to see me with this?
Right. It's not wrong to have nice things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've spoken about that before. But your point is a good one. What is your motivation? It's not wrong to take care of your things.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's what is your motivation.
Oh, and I would say one more idea of, kind of an application-based thing is exactly that. Taking care of what you already have so
Right.
that you don't need to acquire more. One of the attributes of a consumer society is it's very disposable.
Right.
It's very this can break and I can replace it, no problem. It's easy. There's always more where that came from. Right. And maybe if we can try not to have that idea or that mentality, try not to purchase something with the intent of maybe using it once and getting rid of it. That may be another thing that can help us think less about acquiring more things.
I know last week we talked about disposability as well, and it goes to stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
and being thankful for what you have, because we are thankful for what we have. But if everything is just a castaway, if everything's just a throwaway, just so we can buy more stuff, well, how thankful are you really? If you're throwing away, if it's, how thankful are you? So I think we also should probably, I thought another thing is to think about what are we really producing? And I was really in consideration of the fruit of the Spirit.
Right.
We have to examine ourselves and we have to look for what the Lord is looking for. And the Lord's not looking for the houses and the cars. He's looking for the fruit of the Spirit. And if we're not producing the fruit of the Spirit, then something is wrong. The last thing on my list that I had really was the rich young ruler. And he had a lot of stuff. And Jesus says, sell what you have and give it to the poor. Come follow me. And for lack of a better way of putting it, on my notes, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to put it quite this way, because a consumer-driven society is all about growth, right? And he effectively, when he says, sell what you have and give it to the poor, there is something, like I said, I'm not sure if I should put it this way, degrowth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
there's something to be said for more simplicity in life.
Right.
Having less is often a weight off of us rather than a burden.
If the parable of the sower holds true, which we believe it does, then the cares of this life and the desire for other things chokes the word. Okay, so what's the answer to that? Maybe you ought to get rid of stuff. Maybe we ought to get rid of stuff and get out of the rat race of consumerism and try to live a simpler life. And that might free us up to do the Lord's bidding a little easier, perhaps. So, 1 Timothy 6, verse 8, let those who are rich be rich in good works, not to trust in riches. And frankly, we should not live in a worldly fashion.
Right. And it's easy to excuse ourselves when we live in the society that we do. We can live far differently from maybe the extremes of society and think that, oh, we're all right. But even that, there's probably still room where we can find in our lives where we don't need to live the way that we do, seeking to please ourselves.
Yep, very much so. So, good conversation. Appreciate you, Andrew.
Yep. Thank you, John.
Yep. Hope everyone has a good week. I hope this study's been beneficial for you. Appreciate you tuning in. Feel free to share it with others that you know of. But we appreciate you having ears to hear, and we hope you tune in next week.